People engaged, it's time for Dueling Decades. The Matrix and Blade versus Bloodsport and Renegade. Strap on that cap, bust out the power glove. Come fight for what you love. Dueling Decades. Poop culture, popping pins, dropping hand grenades. Van Halen locked in Mortal Kombat with David Gray. Banner Ballet and Sick, Iron Maiden, GNR. Come fight for what you love. Dueling Decades.
All right, you guys have control of the board yet once again. I can't fucking believe it.
Yeah, we
Pick
do.
your category.
Never go with a computer game when you can go with wrestling.
Shut your mouth, John Cross.
And a failed line of toys.
It's getting ugly.
All right.
Back to Mae Young again.
All right, dude. Should we, Mike, should we do news or TV? What do you want to do?
It doesn't matter where you go.
Well, it does. I mean, TV is definitely our strongest. News is probably our...
rounds now.
You want to do news? We'll do
So
news.
we'll do news.
Okay.
Just so everybody's aware, the score is currently 2-1 in favor of Ashley Judd Half Nelson.
Yeah.
I'll move on to the 2-point
yeah.
rounds.
It's exciting. It's exciting to be on the other side of the bench.
All right. In November of 1988, Jim Crockett Promotions sells to Turner Broadcasting, essentially creating the WCW. Crockett Promotions at the time was a legendary promotion in the territory days and the biggest competitor to McMahon's WWF, but was never able to expand to the national market like McMahon's promotion, and eventually sold the company to Turner Broadcasting after battling years of financial decline. Dusty Rhodes would later comment, "You know, we was just living that American dream, baby, but we done plumb ran out of money."
Man.
And that's news.
That's Turner Broadcasting picking up the WCW, right?
Well, no, it's Jim Crockett Promotions having to sell and to
Right.
Turner Broadcasting, and then that led
But
to
that-
WCW.
Right.
That was a huge thing that had
was the
great
catalyst, yeah.
repercussions and fantastic, and everyone loved it, right? It was a big story.
Well, actually, I don't know if everybody necessarily loved.
All right, stop there, Mike.
Put the shovel down.
No, I'm kidding, dude. Finish. I don't know.
Well, no, it's just it's a little bit of controversy. Not true. A lot of old school wrestling fans don't really like the WWF storyline.
Right.
And they much prefer what was going on during when everything was a territory.
Well, talking about old school wrestling, that very neatly ties into my news story from 1988. I did say that when we were going to do a wrestling episode, and as I said, like I grew up in the UK, so therefore, while there was a WWF and then WWE on cable or actually satellite first and then cable later, when I was growing up, it was all about a show about UK wrestlers. And I did say that when I came on the show that I would do at least one of the choices would be a UK story. So this is a UK news story, and it is actually huge and pivotal, and you'll see why. So ITV, a terrestrial channel in the UK, stops televising British wrestling in 1988 after 33 years. Effectively starting the death rattle of the popularity of the sport in the UK and the careers of icons of the sport in the UK like Giant Haystacks and Big Daddy. British wrestling had been hugely popular sport and entertainment for around 100 years at that point, and it was first televised in 1955, very often twice a week at its peak. American wrestling, as I said earlier, made its start on British satellite TV and as pay-per-view events, and continues now on premium cable channels. And British wrestlers, once the UK stopped televising British wrestling in 1988, began traveling with hugely successful live shows, which were initially very successful, but finally actually dwindled and ended in 93, 94. However, as of 2018, 30 years later, ITV has announced a new 10-episode series of World of Sport Wrestling, which was the name of the old show. And also as the WWE tries to push into international territories and hosting more and more events in the UK, there looks to be a clash of networks with WWE trying to control the UK public's wrestling intake versus ITV's World of Sport Wrestling with plucky, mostly bearded, truly British wrestlers holding their own and putting on a show 31 years after the initial TV run ended. But the big news story was that a guy called Greg Dyke came in to control ITV TV at the time and went, no more wrestling, even though it was hugely popular, and stopped televised British wrestling in 1988 after 33 years. So that is a big news story. But as I said, it has come back around. And in 2018, 30 years later, they reawakened the ghost, and British wrestling is back on TV again where it belongs.
John, I got a remote control for you.
Listen, I said I would do a British story. I think that's a pretty good find, I have to say. Come on now. Pretty pivotal. I know it's not WWF. I know it's not.
You didn't mention. You should have mentioned NXT UK. I mean,
right, but NXT UK is a completely separate thing, and it's run by the WWE.
True, I guess. I don't know.
Right,
I lost.
The whole point is actually in 2018, and if you look this up, there's actually a huge amount of news stories about this because it's 30 years since the world of sport wrestling went off the air and is now coming back on the air, and with WWE doing a lot more stuff in the UK right now and trying to get other UK live events and other things televised. There literally is right now a clash where you've got traditional British wrestling, which is being televised, but the WWE that's saying, no, we want like full control over international territories and we don't want these competing shows and so on and so forth. So it was a pivotal show for 33 years between the 50s and the 80s, and it's come back and it's as relevant today because it's actually giving British viewers something that they've always wanted, but is now competing with the American cable behemoth. So I think it's actually a genuinely fascinating story.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, over to the Mama Luke's.
All right, you want me to start this one off, man? Or do you want to take it?
You can. I mean, it doesn't make a difference. You could start.
All right. My news story happened on November 15th, 1998. And it was one of the largest pay-per-views of all of 1998. It happened at the Kiel Center in St. Louis, Missouri. And it was Survivor Series 1998 put on by the WWF. And it was good for 478,000 buys, making it the most bought Survivor Series ever at the time. It was the only Survivor Series to feature no elimination matches. And it was the first tournament held by the WWF for the WWF Championship in over 10 years, the last time being WrestleMania 4 in 1988. At the mere age of 26 years of age, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson reached the very pinnacle of the wrestling universe. He would go on to have his very first title reign with him and Mick Foley swapping alignments in a double turn in a rehash of what we saw with the Montreal Screwjob, with ultimately The Rock defeating Mankind by submission and turning heel, aligning himself with Vince McMahon. The following evening on Raw, McMahon declared The Rock to be the corporate champion, and this helped set up the epic Rock and Austin feud, and that really helped propel the company forward for the next decade. And that all started at Survivor Series of 1988 when The Rock won his first world title, not to mention the first African-American champion in professional wrestling in a very, very long time.
I didn't even think about that. Good
Yeah.
point.
I mean, Ron Simmons was the first in WCW, and we really hadn't seen a African-American world heavyweight champion in a predominant role since Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He was really the first one that they said, this is our guy. And he really took that company to where it is now, along with Austin and Mankind, Undertaker. And this was a real pinnacle start of when that motion really just started, was at that Survivor Series.
All right. So since you said that, I might as well just jump right in here because it ties into yours pretty heavily. March 29th, 1998, it was WrestleMania 14, where Stone Cold Steve Austin defeats Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, to become the World Heavyweight Champion for the first time. And if someone had to go back and really pinpoint like a landmark event to launch the Attitude Era, you would have to think of WrestleMania 14. This is probably where it begins. You got Austin winning the belt, Pete Rose getting a tombstone in the ring, The Rock dropping. You know, I didn't notice this until I did the research for this. The Rock actually dropped "Smell What I'm Cooking" for the first time ever in a it was an interview with Jennifer Flowers. Remember the Jennifer Flowers and Clinton thing?
Yeah.
And then, like I said earlier, that went on. They turned that into "Do You Smell What the Rock Is Cooking?" Became his theme song and his fucking catchphrase and all that shit. That started right there. And how's this for attitude? Because of the Montreal screw job, The Undertaker was actually prepared to kick the shit out of Shawn Michaels if he pulled that again against Austin. But obviously that never happened. HBK laid down for Stone Cold, probably the best worker of all time, passing the torch to arguably the best champion of all time. And that happened at WrestleMania 14. And there was huge lead up to this. You had Mike Tyson was the special enforcer for the match. And he was with Degeneration X for like a couple of weeks. And then, of course, the referee gets knocked out. And see, here's a spoiler. He jumps into the ring, does a quick 3 count, ends up knocking out Shawn Michaels after the match, and then takes the Austin 316 jersey, or shirt rather, that Austin gave to him. And if this doesn't really give you a pinpoint of passing the torch, and this was something that Shawn Michaels did not want to happen. He was actually mad about it afterwards. But Tyson took that shirt, the Austin 316 shirt, and as he was knocked out in the ring, laid it over his face.
Oh, wow.
As
yeah,
like,
that's right.
like it was a cough. Yeah. And he was like pissed off about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there it is. And then an interesting fact that, you have friends that are going to be like, oh, The Rock's better than Austin. But I mean, it can go either way. But Austin's shortest title reign was 55 days. That's longer than 6 of The Rock's 8 reigns, which is pretty crazy that they were so short.
Incredible.
But yeah, anyhow, WrestleMania 14 and Stone Cold beating Shawn Michaels for the title for the first time.
Well, obviously, if you take a look at the 80s, 88, Jim Crockett selling to Turner Broadcasting System, that's, like I said, the catalyst for becoming WCW. That really marks the end of the territories, which had kind of become, that was commonplace back then. You had guys that would go to one territory, they would skip over to work another territory, defend a belt from the other territory. It's kind of the Wild West, as a lot of people referred to it in the wrestling industry. So you have Crockett selling to Turner to create WCW. That really kind of is the nail in the coffin of the territories as we previously knew them. And it's interesting how all this 80s stuff is kind of really coming back around now. Now you have all these prominent independent promotions that could be kind of considered the territories, with the interwoven, guys that'll cross over from one territory to the other. So it's interesting how that kind of has all wormed its way back 30 years later. But you look at the 90s, this is a really big turning point for the professional wrestling industry. You have the birth of the Attitude Era. You have the, WCW kind of getting its legs underneath it, and they ignite the Monday Night Wars around this particular time, 97, 98, 99, really kind of pivotal times for professional wrestling in the mainstream and working its way into culture and everything like that. You have Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, arguably 2 of the biggest stars of the entire industry altogether. WrestleMania 14, Survivor Series, The Rock at 26 becoming one of the youngest champions in history. Like Mark said, one of the first African-American champions as well, or one of them, after Ron Simmons at WCW. I'm going to have to hand it to the Mama Lukes, the 90s, on this one, just because 90s was such a pivotal and memorable time, and one that fans really look back on with a lot of admiration for sure.
I'm going to put that down to the fact that Britain is no longer relevant, and I.